This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
When you're in a community and it's a community-based restaurant, those interactions with the locals, those guys are going to visit you every day, you know, sometimes multiple times a day. You know, it's a really special connection that you get to gain with these people.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Growing up as a hotelier's son, Sam Byrd understood that the focal point was always the restaurant, and more specifically, the kitchen. It gave him a strong grounding in the art of hospitality from a young age and a natural knack of knowing what people want when they dine out. And he's become a leading light in the culinary offering in Cairns, Queensland. Sam Byrd is the owner of NOA, Guerrilla and Palooka in Cairns. Sam, how are you?
Good. Thank you.
It's good to get you on the show. You're really sort of setting the standard up there in far north Queensland in Cairns. What's things like up there at the moment?
Yeah. Oh, look, things up here at the moment are, you know, technically speaking, it's the start of our season up here, so the weather's kind of cooled down a little bit, and the tourists are starting to flow back into the city after, you know, a relatively quiet kind of start to the year. So, you know, the buzz is kind of starting to generate a little bit around the city, and it's getting busier, which is fantastic.
Cooled down in Cairns sort of almost sounds comical compared to somewhere like Canberra where I am. What's the temperatures like, and does it affect sort of what you do, the sort of warmer climes that you're in?
Yeah, look, in terms of the actual, you know, the climate, it's more, you know, in terms of the degrees, it doesn't change too much from summer to winter, if you could even call it summer to winter. But basically we have two seasons, so it's the wet season and the dry season. So through the wet season, it rains nearly every other day. It's hot, it's humid. It's not necessarily, you know, a pleasant place to be, especially for tourists. But, you know, come kind of April, May, June, July, we come into this beautiful time of the year where it kind of cools to about, you know, 25, 26 degrees during the day, and it doesn't rain, it's beautiful and sunny. And yeah, it's just a beautiful place to be.
It sounds like the place to be during winter. We've spoken to a few industry professionals from North Queensland, further north than you, but I don't think we've spoken to anyone in Cairns. Give us a sense of Cairns and its dining landscape.
Yeah, so Cairns it's a funny place in terms of, I guess, you know, it runs from an area called Palm Cove all the way up to Cairns. So all along there is kind of the northern beaches. So, and even further so to Port Douglas. So if you think of it as, you know, Port Douglas is at about just over an hour, maybe an hour and a half from the Cairns city centre. So I guess, you know, when you talk about a dining landscape, it kind of starts, you know, in Cairns, but it runs all the way up to Port Douglas, where there's a number of you know, decent restaurants that are kind of up that way as well. I don't know, probably you've heard of Oak's Kitchen and Garden, and the guys that, you know, what they're doing up there, and they've got a great little Thai restaurant in Port Douglas at the moment as well. But I guess, you know, they set the benchmark up that way. And then if you flow back, you know, towards Cairns, you've obviously got Nico at Nunu's doing his thing, and then you kind of venture back into the city.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. You've got three very different venues. Tell us a bit about them.
Yeah, so I guess Noah's kind of I guess you could say the flagship restaurant. So it's a restaurant I guess I've had for a number of years. It's almost been, well, I think it's a decade this year. So it's that restaurant's been a bit of a journey. And before that, it started just down the road at a little cafe called Osmosis. So that was the first kind of food restaurant venture that I started with my father, I think 12 years ago. So I guess Dad kind of just, we're both kind of in not really knowing what we wanted to do. We just finished up with the jobs that we had. I was still quite young. I think I was 23 when I opened Osmosis. And Dad was coming towards, the twilight years of his hotelier career, and kind of he didn't want to move anymore. So I think, as a hotelier, you kind of, every 2 to 3 years you pack up and you move to a different city because that's just the world of hoteliers. So I guess he came to a point in his career where he didn't want to do that anymore. And I was kind of, not in a bit of a rut, but kind of deciding, well, do I want to keep going down the path of hotels, or do I want to, do something a little bit different? So we just walked past an old bike shop, and we thought, shit, that would make a great little cafe. Why don't we do that? And then, two months later, we kind of threw the doors open of Osmosis. So that's kind of where it all started. And then, gradually over time, we evolved, and, we sold Osmosis really quickly because it just went absolutely bananas, and we ran out of space, or ran out of, what we really wanted to do. So we went and leased a shop. We went and leased a much bigger space on the next corner and kind of built NOA. And that was 10 years ago.
Well, tell us about the differences between the three venues that you have. You got NOA, Guerrilla and Palooka. What are their sort of individual offerings?
Yeah, so NOA, I guess NOA's really it's my creative outlet. I wouldn't really stamp cuisine as such on the restaurant. It's always been, we've always just called it's an extension of somebody's, or of the neighborhood, their living room, basically. So, our vision was always it to be such an approachable place where people could come, whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, afternoon, any time of the day, and get that experience, that kind of where they feel comfortable any time of the day, basically. And the cuisine has evolved and gone in different directions throughout the years, depending on the chef that I've teamed up with, or that sort of stuff. Because I'm also, I'm big on letting them have their creative outlet on what they want to do as well. And I guess NOA's been a perfect platform to allow chefs to do that, because it's so much more than the food. It's what we offer in terms of the atmosphere. It's got this beautiful veranda at the front that just picks up the breeze so beautifully, and it's got big open windows. It's very much a North Queensland style restaurant, because it's just all open. And then we've got Guerrilla, which we actually opened Guerrilla, I think, in 2021. So it was just when COVID was still there and still present. I mean, we didn't feel the repercussions of COVID nearly as much as I think people down south did. I think Cairns was pretty protected in that area. Obviously, we had a bit of a shutdown period. But in saying that, we pivoted towards our takeaway, and we had another restaurant that we sold a couple of years ago called Hopscotch, which is a big Italian restaurant on the south side of Cairns. So thankfully, that product really lent itself to the takeaway market, and in some aspects, we're probably just as busy through COVID. Even though our restaurant was closed, if you kind of peer through the window on a Friday night, you'd have 6 or 7 chefs just pumping out pizzas and pastas, and we'd have 15 delivery drivers just running around Cairns delivering food. So it was a pretty insane experience, really.
I want to sort of explore what you're doing there in Cairns a little bit further, but you grew up as a hotelier's son. Take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play in your family growing up?
Yeah, it was interesting, because I guess I had two different worlds, because my parents split up when I was quite young, so I would have been maybe 4 or 5, and then at that point we're actually in Darwin in the Northern Territory. So Dad was running a hotel up there. It was the Atrium, the Novotel Atrium. So it was when they split up, I guess. My mum. We just came from a big family, so there was a number of us. It was my 3 brothers, and then mum went and remarried, and two families kind of came together and connected, and ended up being, 6 of us. And then my dad remarried and had a few kids as well. So it was just a huge family. And I guess, living in a house in Darwin, having my mum work full time and my stepdad work full time, it really just fell on us kids to prepare dinner. So we'd all be given a day, and we just kind of rotated through. And it would have been only 9, 10, 11. But we had to prepare dinner for the family, because mum didn't finish work till 5:30, and she had 6 kids, and she wasn't big on cooking anyway. So it was it was like, well, which was great from our point of view. We learned to understand food and touch food from a very young age. And then although it wasn't inspiring food, spaghetti bolognese and chicken parmesan or lasagna, or just basic recipes that 9, 10 or 11-year-old kids could prepare. But it gave us that first insight into what food was like, and what it was like to be in a kitchen and handle those ingredients.
Darwin is heavily influenced by Southeast Asian ingredients and cooking. Is that an experience you had as a kid as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think any kid that grew up in the 90s in Darwin had that experience, with the Pratt markets and the Mindle Beach markets, and the Rapid Creek markets. And it's heavily influenced by Southeast Asia. So, but in saying that, that's going to those markets and especially on a Saturday morning after soccer practice, my memories of going to Mary's Laksa House and getting a laksa and all those sorts of things. I think anybody that grew up in Darwin had those experiences and those kind of vivid, food moments. So yeah, absolutely. That's, and I guess still to this day, that's where I kind of take my food journey. Like if I had to say what's my favorite cuisine to kind of be around or serve, would have to be that's what excites me the most. I think that comes from my early memories of growing up in Darwin.
What sort of lured you to a career in hospitality, and when did you start to sort of think of it as a career? Yeah,
I think, look, like I said, having, dad as a hotelier and just being in hotels, because, when I wasn't with mum, I would go see dad on school holidays. He'd always be living in the hotel. So it would kind of become our playground, the hotel. Me and my 2 brothers would run amok, and we'll be, whether it's in the laundry downstairs or in the kitchens or in, and then we just kind of grew into, well, we're here, we might as well just work. So the restaurants kind of became, no one wants to work in the laundry and housekeeping. So, we my brothers and I were straight into the restaurant, and, whether it was polishing cutlery or polishing glasses or doing all those basic jobs initially, and then just evolving, every school holidays, or when we were finally old enough to actually go out and get a job, we already had, all those skills because we'd already been doing it for a number of years.
Where were your sort of first steps, outside of sort of your experiences with your dad, sort of into the industry?
Yeah, I think early on, Dad was in Palm Cove, I guess, kind of towards the back end of my schooling. So living in Palm Cove, there's a number of restaurants and hotels, and it's really just it's a playground for restaurants, especially back then. There was that's when Nico first opened up. Nunu's. I would have been, I think I was in grade 11. So I remember it so well. And I was actually, I was working at the restaurant right next door to where Nunu's was. And the way that it was basically, it used to be called the Outrigger Hotel. So there was four sites out the front of the Outrigger Hotel, kind of lined up one next to each other. And Nico had the restaurant in the middle, and I was working on the restaurant on the side. So, although, that was my first proper, I guess, introduction to that level of restaurant, or that level of cooking, or that aspiring to be, oh wow, well that's something different that I haven't seen before, was when Nico, opened Nunu's and made those waves up here in far north Queensland, all those years ago. Because you'd always look across to the restaurant next door going, that's pretty cool.
You spent some time in Switzerland as well. How different was that to the sort of world that you sort of grew up in?
Yeah, look, it was completely different. I think, straight after high school, it was, although I wanted to be in hospitality, it was really just trying to figure out what direction that could take. And I think, obviously with my dad's career, he'd seen it go in so many different ways for people in hospitality. And he really wanted me or give me the best possible opportunity to see something kind of outside of Australia. So, when I finished grade 12, I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to go to a hospitality school in Switzerland, which totally opened my mind. It was, it's a totally different game over there, I guess. It's something that they take extremely seriously, and hotels and restaurants and hospitality in general is seen as very much as a flourishing career in Europe. So, going over there and doing that just totally, well, that was the start of it all. For me, it was really going to that school and understanding, that world, and then being able to travel, because the way that the school worked is that you would do 6 months in the school, and then 6 months you'll travel to somewhere around the globe and do an internship, which was incredible. I was able to go to, St. Thomas in the Caribbean and work at the Ritz-Carlton for 6 months. Yeah, I went to China and did the same sort of thing, working at the Four Seasons, and then went off to Spain and in Mallorca and worked at a boutique hotel up in the mountains in Mallorca. So, my experiences were vast, and it although the language was at times extremely difficult, I think again one thing that we always had in common was the understanding around the food and the culture, because I think although you can't communicate verbally, I think I know that even as a chef or restaurateur, that there's a certain vocabulary that you just understand one another when it comes to food, and that's kind of where I was able to get through working in those countries that obviously English isn't the mother tongue.
Well, being afforded these sort of amazing opportunities to immerse yourself in all the different cultures across the world, is there any sort of one sort of experience that you had that you can tell us about that sort of had an impact on you with all of these sort of 6 months sort of immersions that you experienced?
Yeah, I think, having the immersion in Europe where the hospitality culture is quite precise and very, straight down the line in the way that they approach the service aspect of the restaurants or the hotels or the, and then on the flip side, then going to somewhere like, the Caribbean and working in St. Thomas, where it's an American island, and understanding that American side of service and the way that they carry, because obviously tips is what they live and die by. So, the service is so much more personalized, where it's not so, it may not, still refined, but really trying to get to know those customers, those guests on that super personal level, so you can connect in some sort of way in hope that you can, at the end of the day, get a greater tip, because that's obviously, the ultimate goal from that American point of view. And I think, it's really fascinating where in Europe it's so much less personal, but it's so precise, and their knowledge around a product or their knowledge around the wine or whatever they're serving is amazing. But at the end of the day, that personal connection is everything.
Tell us about coming back to Australia. Where did you sort of find your feet once you had all this sort of global experience?
Yeah, look, I went to Atlanta. So when I finished school in Switzerland, I had this idea that I wanted to go back to America. My dad's American, so I guess and he's from the South as well. So there's this desire to kind of understand, more about, what happens over there. And I think, at the time I probably even had a desire to really possibly live there and embrace that American life, American dream, as they say. So I went and worked at a hotel there in Atlanta, in Buckhead, which is kind of the affluent area of Atlanta. But I guess I made the mistake where I was like, I'll try something different. And I went and did kind of front office, and I hated it. I think I lasted, 2 months, and I couldn't think of anything worse. I thought, so I made a few phone calls, and I was like, well, if I'm going to go back to Australia, I'm going to go and, obviously back to what I love, which is food and beverage, and do something that's really going to, not just, help me evolve my career, but something that's going to really challenge me. And I got in touch with Edna Cunningham, who was running, Gordon Ramsay just opened up his restaurants in Melbourne, Maze and Maze Grill. And Edna was the general manager there at the time. So I just jumped on a plane and flew straight into Melbourne, and that's when I came back to Australia, and I became the bar and beverage manager at Maze, which again was fantastic. It was kind of a leap back into the Australian hospitality world, and although the restaurant, unfortunately, for whatever reason, didn't last for as long as everybody would have hoped. It was a very intense, 7 or 8 months that I was there. But just working, it's just a different world when you work with people that are just, they generally just want to succeed, and they generally love what they do, and they want to move in a direction, and they all want to move in the same direction. I think that came from Josh, who was the exec chef at the time, Josh Emmett. And he just had this persona about him when he walked into the room. You couldn't help but just, almost stand at attention, because he just knows how to demand that attention. And I, from a leader's point of view, I think that was, his that ability, or seeing him being able to do that was key to kind of me taking on, in my early kind of years in opening restaurants, was learning that skill where, you gain that instant respect by walking into the room. It's almost, at times it's even, that faking it till you make it kind of scenario, where you demand so much respect and attention, and by just your persona and your energy and the way that you carry yourself, that you can get away with little things that you may still not know or truly understand.
When you moved back to Cairns, how did it feel? Did Cairns and the opportunities there feel different after this global experience that you'd had?
Yeah, absolutely. I think moving back to Cairns, when Maze closed, and when you feel somewhat defeated, you kind of revert back to what and going back home was the natural instinct in just kind to go back to a place and try to reestablish myself, and decide what my next move would be. So coming back to Cairns was a bit like that, and it took me, once coming back to Cairns, it took me a couple of years to just really, find what I was looking for, and that was going out and doing something for myself. I guess I'd always struggled through the years working for other people. I really, really struggled with it, to the point where I probably was, especially early on as a teenager, or my early adulthood, where I was even let go from a few jobs, because not sure what it was, whether it was I'd start really, really high, and I'd go all guns blazing, and then kind of just get dissatisfied in whatever was happening, or it wasn't happening fast enough for me, or not happening in the way that I would have liked it. So I guess finding my feet and taking that opportunity, with osmosis, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
There's a sort of a cliche about the industry that there are a bunch of sort of misfits and outcasts who sort of find a creative outlet to shine. You mentioned how important NOA was for your own creative outlet. Tell us about how important that is for you, that the restaurant's as a creative outlet.
Oh, look, the restaurants are, anybody that's kind of worked in a restaurant for any kind of period of time understands that restaurants are very interesting places, and there's certain things that go on in restaurants probably you wouldn't get away with in any other industry. In terms of, culturally, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in restaurants. But you're right. It's just, you have to understand it's just a lot of misfits. It's a lot of misfits kind of put together, and different personalities and different, and everyone's got their, because it's such a creative industry, not just, in the kitchen, but also what we do out the front, in the way that we want to present something, or the way that we want to service our guests, or the way that we want the venue to look or feel or smell. Everyone's got very different ideas on what that looks like. And I think, Dad and I going into business initially at osmosis in the start of NOA, we clashed hugely over probably the most silly minor things. But, he's a super creative. He's an artist. He grew up building, he used to love to build dolls houses as a young adult. I remember as a kid, I was 6 or 7, I was thinking, why is my dad building these dolls houses? But he just, the intricacies of building these things, and the little pieces of the furniture and the bed and those sorts of things. It's those attention to detail, I guess, that makes a restaurateur so successful, is just really understanding those attention to detail and following through on that day to day.
You mentioned sort of the challenges of working for other people and then finding your feet with your own businesses and being able to be creative. What's some of the challenges that you've personally faced through the years in building your own businesses and getting that life balance as well?
Yeah, I think, the challenges of probably running any business, especially a small business in a regional town, there's a lot of issues, or a lot of difficulties, I guess, that comes with that. But especially restaurants. I mean, restaurants, again, they're not easy things to run or to have, and we run a really slim profit margins, and I think that's something that a lot of people they don't realize exactly, the sort of profit margins that restaurants run on. And it can go either way very, 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 very quickly. So, I mean, earlier on, when we didn't have, I think we went to the bank and got, a loan for $10,000, and that was kind of the start. And so not having the financial, backing to, we had to keep things super tight, from the beginning. We couldn't allow things to, too much fat. So, you work day and night. I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd roll back into bed at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. In the early days, until you just hit the ground, and you just had to grind day in, day out, and not really even having a plan on when any of that was going to stop, or if it was going to ever stop. But you just trusted the process, and probably in a way you probably didn't even really know if you wanted it to stop. It just became the norm, in a funnily enough way. And then eventually, the longer you grind, the result comes. And, thankfully, NOA, it's really been built into a bit of an institution in this town. And I surrounded myself with people that I really trusted, and, trusted the process, and trusted, my vision for where I wanted to take it. And that kind of came to fruition.
You're very open about having high functioning autism. Tell us a little bit about that, because there's so many misconceptions about, what autism actually is. Tell us a bit about how it is for you, and the sort of positives and negatives that it plays for you on your journey.
Yeah, well, I think growing up, I had behavioural issues, and that, and unfortunately back in the 90s, they didn't fully understand autism, and the doctors didn't really understand what that was. So, I was misdiagnosed, a million times. I was dragged in and out of, counsellors' offices and doctors' offices. My mum really wanted to try to find out what was wrong with me, but but the more she looked, the less she found, so to speak, because it wasn't until I think, when I was, because I've only just been diagnosed in the last, 12 months. So I think, the more research I did, I realized that, they didn't really fully understand high functioning autism until, I would have been 22, 23. So it was probably, unfortunately for my mum and for all the people around me, as, through my childhood, including my brothers and sisters, they they really suffered in what what I was and the things that I'll get up to. But moving into my adulthood and kind of my career as a restaurateur and owning my own restaurants, I think high functioning autism. People describe it as you've got a Ferrari as a brain, but unfortunately the brakes don't work. So your brain, your brain goes at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but you don't know how to stop it, which is the scary thing. So that can result in a multitude of different things happening. But what, in terms of the positives when it comes to that is people with high function autism are actually really, really, really good at operating their own businesses because they're relentless, I guess, in their pursuit of what they're trying to achieve. They become, it becomes their special interest, and they go, 100% in, and there's no, hopping out until they've reached that goal. But with the negatives with that is, you're not going to hop out until you've reached your goal. So at what cost? And the cost of that of your friendship groups, your family, or your anything else that normal people do day to day. Whether they've got other interests. They go out fishing with their mates on the weekend, or they go to birthday parties or family gatherings or weddings, or that doesn't, in our brains, that stuff is irrelevant at the time. The only thing that matters is what's right in front of us. So I guess succeeding in business and being able to open 6 restaurants in the last 10 years and all of them succeeding in fantastic ways is down to my ability just to concentrate and grind day to day and until I get the result.
Do you think that there's the industry sort of suits someone of your nature with a brain that ticks over like that? It allows you to do multiple things at once, and really, the creative outlet is really down to what your vision is. So, do you think the industry is beneficial in that sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and again, the more research I did and reflecting on different personalities that have kind of come in and out of my life over the years, people with high functioning autism, and my business partner, Davey O'Rourke, he would say things like, I'd walk into the venue and go, Davey, why is that fan, at the back of the room, why is it turned off? Or why is that light why the light's not at the exact, and he would say, Sam, 99% of people that walk into this venue wouldn't even notice that. But that little attention to detail, and it would set me off. It would set me into a spin. I just couldn't get my head around why that's been missed, or why they haven't understood that that's super important. Whether it's important or not is up for debate. But for me, and that's probably why it's made me so successful. Those little things, that they're to me, that it's everything. It's the guest experience. It's and it's like if my Davey, my business partner, is a chef. I walk into the kitchen and if the gnocchi is not that beautiful, fluffy, pillowy kind of gnocchi that one would expect to get, if it's not that exact, I'll throw away 15 trays of gnocchi. And he'll just look at me like, what are you doing? And it's like, well, it's, that just for me, it's probably, for him, it's like, it's more than servable. It's delicious. But for me, it's like, no, that's not the product that we, and he just never, he doesn't understand it. And I probably don't understand him, but that's high functioning autism. It's just those little things that add up to the big things.
Well, you've made the most extraordinary impact on the culinary landscape of Cairns, and you're continuing to do so. What do you love about what you do?
What I love about what I do is the challenges every day. I mean, every day is different. Walking to the restaurant and the customers and the interactions that we have with the customers. And I've always built my restaurants in communities or neighborhoods. I've always steered away from the city. I think, and that's on purpose because, when tourists, it's a different interaction that you have with them, from a service aspect, where when you're in a community and it's a community-based restaurant, those interactions with the locals, those guys are going to visit you every day, sometimes multiple times a day. It's a really special connection that you get to gain with these people, and it's something that I really enjoy, and I enjoy coming down and having those experiences.
Well, Sam, it's an absolute honour to have you today on Deep in the Weeds to hear a part of your story, and look forward to hearing much more of it in the years to come. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Huck. Appreciate it.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.